Let me ask you something first. Have you ever watched a chess match where neither player wants to make the next move? Because whoever moves first might lose everything? That's exactly where we are right now, April 2026. And the board is the Middle East. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Iran is a country with sky-high inflation, a currency that's practically worthless, and an economy held together with tape and prayers. Yet somehow, this country has been standing nose to nose with the United States and its allies for over 70 years without collapsing. How is that possible? The answer isn't that Iran is powerful enough to win. The answer is that Iran has always known exactly where the line is, and it has never fully crossed it. Until now. So let me set the chessboard for you. Think of Iran as the general. That's the king piece in Chinese chess, called Shang-Chi. The general doesn't need to run around the board. It just needs to exist in the right position. And Iran's position? It sits right on top of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway roughly 33 kilometers wide at its tightest point, through which 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes every single day. 20%. That's not a rounding error. That is the jugular vein of the global economy. For decades, Iran threatened to close that strait. Most of the time, those were bluffs. The world held its breath, Iran backed off just enough, and the game continued. But something changed in 2026. That tightrope Iran has been walking for 50 years, it started shaking violently. In April 2026, US intelligence sources reported that Iran had deployed naval mines inside the Strait of Hormuz. If you're wondering why that matters, mines don't care whose ship they hit. They don't discriminate between a military vessel and a tanker carrying oil for Japan, South Korea, or Germany. That single move signaled something the world hadn't seen in decades. Iran was finally touching the live wire. Then, on April 13th, the US Navy began intercepting cargo ships entering and leaving Iranian ports. A full blockade. 5 days later, April 18th, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, declared a complete and indefinite closure of the Strait of Hormuz. They fired warning shots at passing vessels. This wasn't a bluff anymore. This was a declaration. Now here's where you need to think like an economist, not just a newsreader. Iran didn't close the strait to win militarily. Iran closed the strait to push global oil prices to $200 or even $300 per barrel, to trigger enough economic pain worldwide that the United States would be forced to back down. It's like someone who can't beat you in a fistfight, deciding instead to cut the power to your entire neighborhood. Mutually assured economic destruction. The United States responded the way only a superpower can. For the first time in decades, Washington deployed 3 aircraft carrier strike groups simultaneously. The Lincoln, the Ford, and the Bush, with over 200 fighter jets, including F-35C stealth fighters and EA-18G electronic warfare aircraft, all converging on the Strait of Hormuz as of April 25th. Let me put that in perspective. 1 carrier strike group is already an overwhelming show of force. 3 at once is a statement that says, we did not come here to negotiate. We came here to enforce. This is the cannon in our chess metaphor. And in Shang-Chi, the cannon is the most cunning piece on the board. It doesn't need to be close to its target. It fires from a distance using other pieces as a platform. The United States has spent decades building those platforms, alliances with the EU, Israel, Japan, the Philippines. When those platforms are in place, the American cannon can strike from anywhere in the world. But here's the critical weakness of a cannon. If you remove its platforms, if you convince those allied countries to step back, stay neutral, or look the other way, the cannon's power is dramatically reduced. That's precisely what China and Russia have been quietly trying to do for years. Speaking of China and Russia, let's address the elephant in the room. Iran has survived this long partly because of larger shadows standing behind it. China buys Iranian oil through what analysts call a ghost fleet, tankers that quietly move oil off the books, bypassing sanctions. Russia provides diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Both countries have given Iran just enough oxygen to keep breathing. But, and this is the crucial point, neither China nor Russia will directly intervene militarily on Iran's behalf. Think about why. During the Korean War in the early 1950s, China was a newly established nation with almost nothing to lose. Sending troops to fight Americans was a survival calculation. But China in 2026 is the world's second largest economy, deeply embedded in global trade. If China were to militarily confront the United States over Iran, it wouldn't just face America. It would immediately lose access to European markets, its largest trading partners. That's not a strategic move. That's economic suicide. Here's the painful irony for Beijing. China desperately needs Iranian oil to fuel its factories. But if the Strait of Hormuz is fully closed, China is one of the first countries to suffocate from energy shortages. They need Iran, but they cannot save Iran when it truly matters. In our chess metaphor, China and Russia play the role of advisors and elephants, pieces that protect and support, but by the rules of the game, they cannot cross the river to fight directly. Now, you might be wondering, hasn't this tension between the US and Iran always existed? What makes 2026 so different? Two things changed everything. First, in February 2026, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. The US and Israel expected this to trigger internal chaos, perhaps even regime collapse. The result was the complete opposite. The IRGC tightened its grip. Fear and hatred unified factions that had been quietly feuding. The general didn't fall, it hardened. Second, with Khamenei gone, the IRGC, essentially Iran's military political engine, took full control. And the IRGC understands one thing very clearly. Any compromise now would be seen as weakness from within. Any weakness from within collapses the regime. So they chose the most stubborn path available. Scatter mines, deploy drones, stall the American cannon for as long as humanly possible. Here's the negotiating deadlock in plain language. The US demands Iran completely dismantle its missile and nuclear programs. Iran sees those programs as the only insurance policy keeping it alive. Iran demands the US withdraw all military forces from the Middle East. America sees that presence as a core strategic interest it has maintained for 80 years. These are two parallel lines that will never meet. Let me bring in a historical example, because this isn't the first time we've seen this pattern. In 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, essentially kicking British oil interests out of Iran. Britain responded by blockading Iranian ports and calling for an international boycott. By 1953, Iran couldn't export a single barrel. The economy collapsed. And that's when the CIA and British intelligence ran Operation Ajax, a covert coup that removed Mossadegh and reinstalled the Shah. The lesson the West took from 1953: oil is not just a commodity. It is a political instrument of the highest order. Whoever controls the flow of oil controls the conversation. That lesson has never expired. It's just playing out on a much larger stage in 2026. Now let me bring this closer to your everyday life, because this isn't just a story about ships and missiles. Oil prices already spiked above $115 per barrel earlier in April, before cooling slightly to around $90 to $91, largely because countries released emergency strategic reserves. But those reserves are not infinite. They buy roughly 3 to 6 months of buffer. One significant incident in the Strait, one tanker hit, one mine detonating near a major vessel, and we're looking at $125 to $150 per barrel almost immediately. What does that mean for you?
It means gasoline prices climb, shipping costs climb. Everything that gets transported, which is nearly everything you buy, costs more. Inflation, which central banks have been desperately trying to tame, re-accelerates. Interest rates stay high or go higher. Borrowing becomes more expensive. Businesses pull back. Hiring slows. And here's the part that the headlines often miss. It doesn't even require the strait to be physically closed. Just one giant oil tanker getting struck would cause maritime insurance premiums to surge by several 100%. Shipping companies would reroute or pause operations. The strait becomes economically closed, even if ships can technically still pass through it. That alone would send markets into a spiral. So where does gold fit into all of this? In modern financial history, when gunfire rings out, or even when it might ring out, gold has consistently proven to be the ultimate safe haven. When the US-Iran conflict officially escalated at the start of 2026, gold hit a record high above $5,500 per ounce. Central banks and major funds are flocking to gold right now, not because they're panicking, but because gold is the only major asset that carries no counterparty risk. It doesn't depend on any government's promise. It doesn't require any institution to remain solvent. Bitcoin, by contrast, has behaved very differently from what many predicted. When the US and Israel conducted strikes on Iran at the end of February 2026, Bitcoin didn't rise as a digital safe haven. It dropped from nearly $90,000 down to around $65,000. When fear is real and immediate, capital moves to what history has proven, not what theory promises. Let me introduce the third chess piece we haven't fully discussed yet: Israel. And then there is Israel, the chariot. For decades, this piece has been cutting through the board, neutralizing the proxies commanded by the Iranian general, waiting for the perfect window to deliver a final check. In 2026, the engine is screaming. Israel has begun moving its most advanced shields to the front lines, synchronizing every heartbeat with Washington for a strike on Iran's underground heart. For Israel, this isn't just a move, it's a once-in-a-century gamble. The perfect window to deliver a final checkmate against the Iranian general. And then there's the European Union, the pawn that has crossed the river. Once a pawn crosses the river in Shangqi, it becomes far more dangerous. Every move must be calculated with extreme caution. It can move sideways, it can hold its position. But one thing is certain: every step forward is irreversible. There is no going back. The EU has been steadily imposing economic sanctions on China, aiming to curb Beijing's support for Iran. Most recently, on April 25th, the EU approved its 20th sanctions package against Russia, while also blacklisting 27 Chinese and Hong Kong entities. The very next day, China retaliated by placing 7 European defense companies under export restrictions. This matters because China controls rare earth materials, resources that Europe's industrial and defense sectors heavily depend on. But the deeper story is this: the EU is no longer neutral. It has chosen a side, willing to sacrifice short-term economic interests to align with the broader strategic direction led by Washington. Let's zoom out and look at the whole board honestly. The United States is simultaneously the strongest and most vulnerable piece in this game. It holds the world's reserve currency and leads in core technologies, but it also carries a historic level of public debt and a deeply polarized domestic society. If the US gets drawn into a prolonged conflict with Iran, the question becomes, how long can even the world's most powerful cannon sustain fire? Iran, meanwhile, is the most stubbornly resilient piece on the board. This is a regime built specifically to survive under siege. They call it the resistance economy, a philosophy that says we would rather regress to the Stone Age than surrender our power and ideology. We saw this mindset during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, when the entire world, including both the US and the Soviet Union, supported Iraq against Iran. Iran was sanctioned, isolated, battered, its people going hungry. It fought for 8 years and never capitulated. That spirit is alive in 2026. Stronger, arguably, because the IRGC has completely separated the survival of the government from the living standards of the people.
The people can suffer hyperinflation. The IRGC will still receive priority for every remaining dollar. As long as the fist stays strong, the general stays on the throne.
So what is actually happening right now, in practical terms? We are in a war of attrition, not fought with bullets, fought with time and endurance. Think of it this way. Imagine someone holding a grenade with the pin pulled, but still gripping the lever tightly. Whoever has the stronger hand can hold it longer. But both sides will eventually get tired. The world is currently detouring around the Strait of Hormuz, adding 10 to 15 days to shipping routes and 40 to 60% to freight costs. Major economies have strategic petroleum reserves to absorb this for 3 to 6 months. They're hurting in the wallet, but not yet collapsing. Iran, on the other hand, has no reserves to draw on. 90% of its government budget comes from oil exports. With the US blockade in place since April 13th, that revenue has dropped to essentially zero. Inflation, already above 60 to 70%, is accelerating. The rial is becoming worthless paper in real time. The question isn't whether Iran is suffering. It clearly is. The question is whether the regime's will to survive outlasts the world's patience with economic pain. History suggests we shouldn't underestimate Iran's endurance. But history also shows that a completely isolated economy with no external lifeline has a biological clock. And that clock is ticking. Now, let me ask you something to consider. The Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, have gone very quiet. Why? Because they know that if Hormuz truly ignites, their own oil infrastructure becomes the first casualty. Their silence isn't neutrality, it's preparation. And the roughly 2,000 ships and 20,000 sailors currently trapped in the Persian Gulf as of late March, they are the most powerful argument Iran has. The US Navy, despite its overwhelming superiority, cannot physically protect every square meter of water against Iranian motorboats and homemade mines. That asymmetry, the world's most powerful navy versus guerrilla tactics in a narrow strait, is Iran's only real leverage. Here's the honest summary of where we stand. This is no longer a regional conflict. It is the most consequential test of the post-World War II global order since the Cold War. 2 irreconcilable demands. 3 carrier strike groups. Mines in a strait that carries a fifth of the world's oil. A regime that has chosen stubbornness over survival. Allies realigning. China watching carefully. Europe hardening. Gold rising. Markets holding their breath. If this stays tense but not exploding, which remains the most likely scenario, the damage is slow, corrosive, and permanent. Inflation expectations destabilize domestic economies everywhere. Long-term investment dries up. People stop planning for a decade from now and start worrying about next month's grocery bill. If it escalates to direct military confrontation, the resolution is faster, but the destruction is immediate and severe. Either way, this is not a story about faraway ships. This is a story about the purchasing power in your pocket, the interest rate on your mortgage, the price of the food on your table, and whether the global system your retirement savings depend on remains intact. We are watching, in real time, what historians will someday call one of the great power transitions of the modern era. The question isn't whether the world changes. It already is. The question is, do you understand the board well enough to protect what matters to you? Because the pawns, us, are always caught in the crossfire of this game. The least we can do is understand who's moving which piece and why. If this raised more questions than it answered, that's exactly the right reaction. The situation is evolving daily. What would you most want to understand better? The oil market impact, what this means for gold and savings, or how this reshapes the US-China relationship long-term?